Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallim. Assalamu alaikum, my dearest brothers and sisters, and welcome. I start with the name of Allah. I praise Allah and thank Him for the blessings of Islam. I ask Allah to raise the rank of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his Muslim family and his companions, and to protect his nation from what he fears for them. I testify that there is no God but Allah Himself. Allah has no partner. He has no similar. He has no opposite. He has no equivalent. He has no organ. He has no appearance. He has no image. He has no form. He has no place. He does not resemble the creation in any way whatsoever. Allah exists without a place and is not in every place. Whenever a person wants to do something beneficial, they should start by correcting their intention, because for the good deeds to be rewardable, they need to be done sincerely for the sake of Allah alone. In other words, to do the good deed seeking the reward from Allah alone. So let us correct our intentions. If one is serious about preparing for their hereafter and being a winner on the Day of Judgment, it is critical for one to correct one's intentions and to do the good deeds in compliance with the rules of the religion. Al-Bukhari and others narrated that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Innamal a'malu binniyat." This means the good deeds are rewarded according to one's intention. In an authentic hadith narrated by Al-Bayhaqi in Shu'ab al-Iman, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "Talabul ilmi faridatun ala kulli Muslim," which means seeking the religious knowledge is obligatory upon every Muslim, whether male or female. This means that there is a minimum amount of religious knowledge that every Muslim male and female needs to learn so as to be safe on the Day of Judgment. By learning the personal obligatory knowledge of the religion, one is able to discriminate between what is lawful halal and what is unlawful haram, and what is valid and what is invalid. Hence, the personal obligatory knowledge is not just for a certain group of people. All of us are in need of this knowledge so as to be obedient slaves of Allah, to fulfill the obligations and avoid the sins. Whether a person is a doctor or a nurse, a school teacher or a college student, a plumber or a taxi driver, a housewife or a shopkeeper, or other than that, one needs to learn the personal obligatory knowledge of the religion so as to be safe in the hereafter. If someone does not learn, how would they even know what an obligation is so as to do it? If someone did not learn, how would they know what are the sins so as to avoid them? Sadly, in the times that we are living in, there are many people who do not learn how to pray and fast in the proper way. For example, many men divorce their wives whilst angry without realizing that the divorce has still taken place. Many people don't learn the rules pertaining to buying and selling, so their transactions are invalid. And many people do not learn how to pray, how to fast, how to give zakah, how to perform Hajj, and so their acts of worship are invalid. The one who learns the basics of belief and other rules of the religion and implements them will be successful in the hereafter. In other words, when a person pays zakah, fasts, or performs Hajj, they do all of this in compliance with the rules of the religion. When one buys according to the rules of the religion. When one sells according to the rules of the religion. And when one marries according to the rules of the religion. A person cannot be certain that they are doing any of the above, any act of worship, in a correct manner if they have not learnt the correct religious knowledge. Ibn Hibban narrated in his Sahih that the Prophet ﷺ said, رُبَّ قَائِمٍ حَظُّهُ مِنْ قِيَامِهِ السَّهْرِ وَرُبَّ صَائِمٍ حَظُّهُ مِنْ صِيَامِهِ الْجُوعِ. This means one might find a person who stays up praying at night but only gains tiredness from their prayer. And one might find a fasting person who only gains hunger from their fast. One of the reasons that a person only gains tiredness and hunger from their acts of worship is because they did not learn the religious knowledge, and thus they performed invalid prayers and invalid fasts. So, this hadith emphasizes the importance of learning the personal obligatory knowledge of the religion, because through this knowledge one learns about the obligatory matters and how to perform them in a valid manner. And it's beneficial here to be reminded that having a good intention without following the rules of the religion is not sufficient. Al-Bukhari, Muslim, and others narrated that a person once stood to pray, and after finishing, he saw the Prophet ﷺ and gave the salam to him. The Prophet ﷺ replied to his salam and said to him, "Irji' fasalli fa innaka lam tusalli," which means, go back and pray, you did not pray. In other words, the Prophet ﷺ told him that he had not performed a valid prayer. The man tried a second time, and again the Prophet ﷺ said to him, "Go back and pray, you did not pray." He tried a third time, and again the Prophet ﷺ said to him, "Go back and pray, you did not pray." Eventually, the man said, "I do not know any other way to pray." The Prophet ﷺ then taught him how to pray in a valid way. The Prophet ﷺ did not say to him, "It does not matter how you pray as long as you have a good intention." The man kept trying, but each time the Prophet ﷺ told him to go back and repeat the prayer. When the companion said, "I do not know any other way to pray," what did the Prophet ﷺ do? He taught him how to pray in the proper way. In other words, from this hadith we learn, for one's deeds to be rewardable and to be accepted, to be valid, one needs to observe at least two matters. One needs to have a good intention, and one needs to act in a way that agrees with what the Prophet ﷺ taught. Having a good intention alone is not enough, and doing the good deed perfectly but without a good intention is not enough. One needs to have a good intention while also fulfilling the rules of the religion. And this can only be done by first learning the religious knowledge. I will now give details regarding Hajj so that we are able to learn the rules of Hajj and perform Hajj in compliance with the teachings of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so that this act of worship is valid and rewardable, insha'Allah. Hajj is one of the greatest matters of Islam. Al-Bukhari narrated that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Buniya al-Islamu ala khams, shahadati an la ilaha illallah, wa anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh, wa iqami as-salah, wa ita'i az-zakah, wa sawmi Ramadan, wa hajj al-bayt." This means the greatest matters of Islam are 5. Number 1, bearing witness, knowing, believing and saying that there is no God but Allah. In other words, there is no creator except Allah, and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the messenger of Allah. Number 2, performing salah. Performing, in other words, the obligatory prayers. Number 3, to pay the due zakah. Number 4, to fast the month of Ramadan. And number 5, to perform Hajj, pilgrimage to the special house, the Kaaba, for whomever can make their way there, whoever has the physical and financial ability to do so. Al-Hajj linguistically means to seek or pursue that which is glorified, and religiously, Hajj means to visit the Kaaba and the site of Arafah during a specific time of the year while in a state of ihram with the prior intention of performing Hajj. Allah specified Hajj with something that He did not specify Salah, Zakah, or even Siyam with, namely, the one who performs Hajj properly, then all of his sins would be forgiven, the enormous ones and the small ones. The above is taken from the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam narrated by Imam Ahmad in his Musnad. Man hajj al-bayta falam yarfuth walam yafsuq raja'a kama waladat ummuh. This means the one who performs Hajj without having intercourse with his wife while in ihram and without committing enormous sins, all of his sins would be forgiven and he would revert to how he was when his mother gave birth to him. In other words, without sins. Subhanallah. Now, there are 3 types of Hajj: Ifrad, Tamattu' and Qiran. If a person intends to just do Hajj by itself, then this is called Ifrad. If a person intends to just do Umrah and then to observe the Ihram for Hajj from Makkah, then this is called Tamattu'. If a person intends to do both Hajj and Umrah in one go, then this is called Qiran. In the Hanafi school, doing Qiran is better than Ifrad and Tamattu', and Tamattu' is better than Ifrad. Who must perform Hajj? It is an obligation upon the pubescent Muslim to perform Hajj without delay once in a lifetime. Hence, it's not an obligation upon the prepubescent child. The Hajj performed in childhood would not thus fulfill the obligation that exists after puberty. It is an obligation upon the one who is sane, and so it's not an obligation upon the one who is insane. It is an obligation upon the one who is free, so it is not an obligation upon a slave, although it would be valid, but this would not fulfill the obligation that exists once the slave is set free. And it is an obligation upon the one who is able to reach Mecca and return to his home place, having monies in excess of what is needed to satisfy one's debts, appropriate residence and clothing, and what one is obligated to spend on those whom one must support from one's departure until one's return. Thus, performing a Hajj once in a lifetime is obligatory upon the Muslim who is free, accountable, and can afford to reach Mecca and return to his home place. This includes having in excess of one's debts, appropriate lodging and clothing, and what one is obligated to spend on those whom one must support from one's dependents, from one's departure until one's return. Among what is included in the meaning of being able is for one to have safe passage to Hajj, and for one to be healthy and physically able to travel and to have a mode of transport, whether in his ownership or by hiring it. And with regards to the woman, being able additionally means to find a non-marriageable male or her husband to accompany her, for she is not permitted to go to Hajj without one of the two if the distance separating her from Mecca is equal or greater than the distance that permits shortening of the prayer, which is around 55 miles. According to the more reliable saying, one needs to do Hajj as soon as it becomes an obligation upon one. And there is a saying that it can be done at one's convenience. In other words, any time in one's lifetime. Now, Hajj involves conditions, shurut, integrals, fard, requisites, wajibs, and recommended matters, sunnahs. A condition refers to that thing which is not considered part of the act, but which, if left out completely or partially, then the act is considered invalid. For example, an example of a condition is wudu. Now, this is not part of the prayer, but if left out partly or completely, then the prayer would be invalid. The integrals of Hajj are defined as those parts of Hajj which, if left out completely or partly, then the Hajj would be considered invalid and cannot be compensated for by slaughtering, and thus one's Hajj is not valid if these integrals are not performed. The requisites, wajibs, are parts of Hajj which are sinful for one to leave out, but do not invalidate Hajj. However, slaughtering is required to compensate for leaving them out. As to the recommended matters, the sunnahs, they are rewardable, non-obligatory doings of Hajj, which if left out, one is not sinful and one's Hajj is not invalidated, but one's reward is reduced. Now, there are 5 matters that are a must for the validity of Hajj, 2 of which are conditions, shart, and 3 are integrals, fard. The 2 conditions are ihram and Islam. The ihram is such as to say in one's heart, I am starting the actions of Hajj, or I am now entering a state of doing Hajj, or a similar statement. Moreover, one needs to say the statement labbaik either during the intention in one's heart or after having established the intention in one's heart. The intention takes place in the heart, but it is better to verbalize it. For example, by saying, نويت الحج والعمرة وأحرمت بهما لله تعالى, which means I intend Hajj and Umrah and observe the Ihram to perform Hajj and Umrah for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. In the Hanafi school, one needs to also say the statement of labbaik at least once. Labbaik Allahumma labbaik, labbaik la sharika laka labbaik, innal hamda wa ni'mata laka wal mulk la sharika lak. One should observe the intention in one's heart while saying the above statement of labbaik. Now, if someone is doing Hajj on behalf of someone else, then one needs to make the intention of doing Hajj on this person's behalf. So, the condition is to have the intention to be in a state of pilgrimage, ihram. This does not mean to wear the clothes of Hajj. Just by wearing the clothes of Hajj doesn't mean a person has entered a state of ihram. Rather, it means to have the proper intention. Likewise, planning to go to Mecca to perform Hajj or Umrah is not considered an intention of ihram. The intention must be established during the months of Hajj, which are Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah and Dhul Hijjah, i.e. the first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah. And the second condition is Islam. It is not valid to do Hajj if you are a kafir. So as I mentioned, the 5 matters which are a must for the validity, 2 of which are conditions, namely being on the religion of Islam and the intention of ihram, such as to have in one's heart, I now enter into the acts of Hajj, or I enter into the state of ihram for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. And one also needs to utter the talbiyah. We will finish today's lesson here today, and insha'Allah I will continue giving you details and talking about the remaining 3 matters that are integrals of Hajj. I hope you can join me in the next lesson. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.